Good evening. I'm Dr. Sundiata Kaita Chajua, your host for Real Talk History as a Weapon in the Struggle for Black Liberation. Today's guest is Dr. William F. Santiago-Valles. He is the Emeritus Associate Professor at State University in Kalamazoo, Michigan, now visiting professor at the University of Michigan Dearborn and at the Graduate School of Senegal's National University, where he is on the editorial board of the African Studies Journal. Since 2015, he has conducted research on vulture funds, strangling U.S. domestic and overseas colonies, and on the life in exile of Cuban General Antonio Maceo. Dr. Santiago has one PhD in political economy and another in cultural history. He also worked with Pablo Freire, Ivan Illich, and Samir Amin. His teaching in African diaspora, global studies, anthropology, and education is informed by an ongoing research in social movements, popular cultures, permanent war regime, and in his financial stage of declining global empire. And practice research methods force ruling classes to reveal a more coercive state. He directs a statewide Africana Studies team in the analysis of the 1967 Detroit Rebellion to develop university curriculum content. Santiago presently co-directs a curriculum project comparing causes, consequences of globalization in West Africa and in the U.S. Midwest, which includes study abroad course and a face-to-face process that funds urban social justice projects. Brother Santiago, welcome to Real Talk.
Thank you. How are
It
you?
is a pleasure. I think I've known you for some 25 years or so,
Yes,
quite a bit of time. So on Real Talk, history as a weapon for Black liberation, we try and keep it very colloquial, informal in this space. So we tend to refer to each other by our first names and as brother and sister. So again, let me say how much I've appreciated your work and our relationship over the past decades. Now, I'd like to have more of a conversation than a straight interview with you tonight. And you watched the show, so you know it's all good. Um, but I want to start with some biographical information from you. And again, because you watch the show, you know that I operate off of Dr. William Cross's negrescence theory, or what's been called the Negro to Black conversion. So my first kind of question is for you. Whether you were born in San Juan, right?
yes,
Now, did you also spend your formative years there?
yes. I
Okay.
was in our country until I was 17 years old, and then I came to the United States to go to undergraduate school in Ohio at a small liberal arts college that was as far away as possible from the Ivy League and the military academies that most of my compatriots went to. I told the college advisor that I wanted to be as far away from any of my prep school classmates as I possibly could. I didn't want to see too many of them ever again.
Wow, that's interesting, and I got to follow that up. Why?
Because the prep school run by the Methodist Church in Puerto Rico was designed to not only turn us into assimilated and subordinate second class citizens of the American Empire, but was designed to help us agree with the policies of the colonial administration. And I was there for 10 years being the unloyal opposition to that whole project.
Okay, a warrior from early on. Now, I suspect um, that you grew up in the period after the U.S. governor, the U.S. appointed governor of Puerto Rico had imposed the gag law, right? I
Yes,
think it's the Ley de la Mordaza, which
yes,
made it illegal to talk about independence, to fly the Puerto Rican flag, or to sing patriotic songs. So in that context, you're maturing, but
yes.
you come from a background in which, and I want you to really get into this for me, in which your great grandfather, your grandfather, and your father were raised in a maroon village, right?
Yes.
So talk about that and their influence in shaping your understanding of the Puerto Rican relationship to the U.S. empire.
My father wrote a history of our family's town, and in that history, he says that the oldest ancestor in our family was an enslaved African who lived in the southeastern coast of Puerto Rico, and he escaped and he walked all the way to the central mountain range through several towns, and he ended up in this town named Comerio. And in that town, there were a lot of people of African descent. There were a lot of white slaves as well that were brought there by the Spanish colonizers. And they created a community of people like existed in several other towns in the central mountain range of Puerto Rico, who were African Muslims, who were Catholic priests, who were escaped forced labor migrants, who intermarried and created a community in which all of them had to be warriors and farmers and teachers. That's the only way they were able to maintain what in my writing and research are called maroon republics. And
Wow,
it was only at the beginning of the 19th century, after most of Central and South America was made independent by the insurgencies there, that Cuba and Puerto Rico acquired the attention of the Spanish colonizers. And then in the 19th century, the central mountain range, both in Cuba and Puerto Rico, became more important for growing tobacco, for growing coffee, and
mm,
for expanding the sugar cane uh, industry that had been moved out of Haiti.
wow, it's fascinating. So what I want you to do now for us is talk about how growing up in the period in which any conversation or any expression of a desire for self determination could land you in jail for 10 years with a $10,000 fine. So you're growing up in that historical moment. You're growing up in a space that's influenced by your paternal line, lineage, and deeply in resistance. And so, what I want you to talk about is how those things combine with your family's class background to begin to shape your intellectual and political choices to make you the scholar, activist, revolutionary that you are today.
My great grandfather, I was able to meet him twice. My great grandfather was an anarchist, a black anarchist, a member of what in our country was called the Socialist Party, which was a party of workers, of people who were in the crafts and who were in the uh, like shoe makers or tobacco uh, growers or people who made cigars. These were the trades that instituted the Socialist Party, and their flag was a red flag. in our village, my grandfather had a 10-foot bamboo pole in his house where he had a red flag, and it was the only one in our town. So, in consequence,
Ah,
nobody ever gave him a job. He couldn't work anywhere. As a black man who was self-educated and who was independent, he was an independent thinker. What my father calls the black people who are free thinkers are the most dangerous in any village. And so he became a maker of coffins because he figured that everybody would die.
mm,
At some point, they'd have to come to him if they wanted a burial, and that's how he established his economic base in our village. And my grandfather, his son, was a poet and a writer and a school teacher, but my grandfather was a member of the Nationalist Party. My grandfather
mm.
of what in Puerto Rico is the equivalent of the Irish Republican Army or the National Liberation Front in Algeria or the Viet Cong. That was the organization that my grandfather belonged to. Uh, and his work was writing poems and writing the first novel that was ever written about our town. And my father was one of the first people from that town to
Oh
go to
man, that is
university in San Juan. And my father was a social democrat. My father was a disciple of Martin Luther King and
mm,
of Gandhi, very different than my grandfather, whose organization believed in open warfare against the American occupation. And my father trained at the National University in Puerto Rico in philosophy and in theology and in history, at the time in which English was the official language in the public schools and the official language of the government. It was only a year after I was born that it was possible to go to public schools in Spanish. And 2 years or 3 years after I was born, there was an armed insurrection run by the party that my grandfather had belonged to in 1950. And this armed insurrection took about 8 or 10 towns in our country, and the American occupation bombed from the air using the National Guard and its Air Force to bomb several of the towns and arrested hundreds of people and exiled many others to put down this armed uprising in 1950. And in 1952, 2 years later, they created this Commonwealth, which is like dressing a pig in a ballet costume or painting lipstick on a pig. And that's the kind of political window dressing to the colonial regime that we have in our country now.
okay. Um, Thank you for that fascinating history. Is there anything else you want to say about the Puerto Rican struggle for independence post the 1950s?
Uh, During my childhood, uh, between 1953 and 1959, I grew up raising funds for the Cuban 26th of July movement, which is the predecessor to the current government in Cuba. And my father and I would go at least once a month to the consulate of the Cuban dictatorship in San Juan to picket in front of the
Mm,
offices of the dictatorship. And then once or twice a year, a man who had gone to seminary with my father, who was Cuban, because there was no Protestant seminary in Cuba, would come to visit our country and to participate in religious rituals, but he would also collect the funds that we had gathered during the course of the year to support the newspapers and the traveling requirements of those who were organizing the insurrection against the Cuban dictatorship. And
mm,
that was my beginning uh, of political education, because at that time I was also learning about what was happening in Vietnam. and what was happening in Algeria, the victory of the Vietnamese in 1954, the beginning of the Algerian insurrection in 1954, all the work that was being done by Presbyterian and Methodist youth in Cuba in order to overthrow the dictatorship, like the beginnings of liberation theology. This was what was happening in the streets while the Protestant missionaries in prep school were trying to force us to read the New York Times and to think that it was the truth.
Thank you so much, my brother. Santiago, I want to explore something with you. Like, I think that we have a genuine understanding that in regard to the African American people and other people of African descent who are brought to the U.S. at a young age, that the negrescence theory that Brother Cross developed, the idea that even though one can be enculturated in different African nationality, the culture of different African nationalities and ethnicities, um, the understanding of blackness in a social sense, right? In a sense that we are oppressed by people of European descent, that they've created a social structure of capital, an economic structure of capitalism, that understanding comes about through a series of encounters, right? And coming out of those encounters, one makes a decision, right? And that decision leads to what he calls immersion, that one makes a conscious decision to dive deep into the history and culture of their people, to participate in organizations that are designed to provide knowledge, understanding, and liberation, right? And that after some time, right, that one emerges, meaning that one comes out of a fixation on blackness to a more rational state where one is subsumed, saturated, one could say, in blackness, but one is now making, one has now internalized and solved the double consciousness problem and moves forward from there. Some become revolutionaries, that kind of thing. Um, we know based on the voluminous nature of Cross and his research team and other Black psychologists who have adopted negrescence, such as my wife, Helen, right? Um, we know that it explains the African American experience, right? Does it explain the Puerto Rican experience in Puerto Rico, or is it more applicable after one's migrated to the heart of the U.S. empire? And before you answer, Bill Cross sent me a text earlier today saying it's universal; it applies everywhere. So, talk to me about the Puerto Rican experience in regard to negrescence. Did you undergo such a kind of conversion, or not?
Uh, I'll try to answer this question three different ways. Uh, my father was one of the first black ministers, Protestant ministers, Methodist minister, to organize an effort to separate the Methodist Church in Puerto Rico from the bishop in the United States, who's seated in Philadelphia, and he became the senior my father became the senior Methodist bishop after long after the Puerto Rican congregations seceded from the Philadelphia diocese. My father was also the first black president of the Bar Association in our country. Everybody knew that he supported the independence movement, uh,
mm,
but but not everybody supported having a black man be president of the bar. And there was a long campaign in the commercial media against my father's campaign, not only because he was for independence, but in addition to that, because he was a black lawyer. Third, I this school that I went to, the white supremacists who were my classmates and the white supremacists who were my teachers reminded us daily that as Puerto Ricans we were second class citizens, and if in addition to
mm,
being Puerto Rican we were black Puerto Ricans, of which there was at least a token in every single grade. Like my brother was in kindergarten when I was in the third grade, and there were maybe two other black kids in my brother's class. There was maybe one or two other black students in my class. In the class before me, there was one African American. We were reminded on a daily basis that if we read people like uh, James Baldwin, or we read people like if we were interested in Nat Turner's Rebellion or Denmark Vesey, that we didn't belong in the same company with them. And when we played the
mm,
in athletic competitions, when we played the schools that were inside the American military bases, whether it was the Air Force base or the Naval base or the Army base, the kinds of conversations that we had in the scrimmage line with the children of the American soldiers were like having a conversation in Mississippi or in Alabama or in
mm.
South Africa or in Algeria or in a military base in the Dominican Republic. We were reminded daily and constantly, if we had ears and eyes to see, if we were
Mhm.
not what Fanon would call alienated, if we were in contact with our reality and we didn't go out of our way to divorce ourselves from it, that we were not like the occupying forces in our country.
Okay. I think that pretty much solves it. Now, you said you were going to give me three possible responses.
Yes.
Okay, you want to give me the second and the third?
Yes. When I was my third year in undergraduate school, I started dreaming in English. And I said, screw
Mm,
this. This has got to end because I'm not going to spend the rest of my life in another people's language. So I told the people in the university uh, that even though for me going to the United States was already going abroad to another country, that I wanted to take a year to go study in somewhere in Latin America. And I went to a school in Mexico that was run by Ivan Illich, who's a Jesuit
mm,
priest. He was a Jew from Austria who converted to Catholicism. He became part of the Jesuit congregation, which is the intellectual elite of the Catholic Church. And he had been in our country. He was vice president of one of the two Catholic universities in Puerto Rico. And he made fun of the bishops because the bishops in Puerto Rico uh, started a political party that was very conservative. And the bishops wore revolvers under their robes because the people who were for independence threatened to execute them. And so they had revolvers under their robes. And Illich thought that this was quite anti Christian and he made fun of them. And so he was expelled from Puerto Rico and he arranged for his exile in Mexico. And in Mexico, he was supported by Puerto Rican millionaires who were also for independence. And he created a school where missionaries from all over the world who were going to go to Latin America learned Spanish, and he used the same method that Paulo Freire used in Brazil to teach people how to read and write in three.
Mm,
He used that same method to teach them how to read and write and speak Spanish in 3 months. And in addition to having this school, that was the moneymaker of the institution. There was a research unit, and there were Latin American scholars who were invited there year round to give short courses. And so I decided to go there, um, for two reasons. One of my teachers was Paulo Freire, who at that time was considered one of the most dangerous people in Latin America.
mhm,
He
mhm.
partnership with a lawyer from the northeastern part of Brazil who had a league of peasants that was 9 million strong. And Paulo was teaching them to read and write, which was the requirement for voting. And 9 million peasants who can read and write in Brazil are people who can change the course of political history in the country. And
Absolutely.
and he was my teacher. And Ivan Illich, who had been the chancellor at the Catholic University in Ponce, was also my teacher at that school. And I, through them, I learned about Fanon. And I also had classmates who were from the insurrections or the insurgencies in Central America and in South America, and I I
Mhm.
learned what it means to be a Latin American as opposed to being a second class Yankee.
That is, man, wow, wonderful. Now you got a third take on this, right? That you
Yes,
wanted to talk about.
one of my classmates there was a woman from Vietnam,
Ah,
and I learned about the relationship between race, class, and gender under colonial capitalism by just having breakfast with this woman every morning.
give us the years that we're
This
talking about.
is 1969.
Okay, 69.
And
Again,
when I went back to Antioch in Ohio, I took my senior philosophy class with the senior philosophy professor there, and he asked me something about the first question that he asked me was, Santiago, what is capital? And I said, well, after I've been outside the United States, I can tell you capital is theft. That's what it is.
yeah,
And
yeah, that's
George
exactly
George
what it
Geiger
is.
George Geiger says, I see you took good advantage of your study abroad.
Santiago, if you were at Antioch in 1970,
I was there
did
from
you?
1965 to 1970.
Okay, I think Lou Turner came there in '69, but you would have been studying abroad. But did you know Lou
I
at
did
Antioch?
I did
Okay,
not.
so look, I want to turn to some internationalist questions. I mean, I brought you on to really talk about the international situation that we are confronting at this moment. But I want to begin with an article that appeared in the February 20th issue of the Mississippi Free Press. And it was written by a black woman journalist with the ironic name of Getty Israel. And her article is entitled, The Congressional Black Caucus Has Lost Its Conscience. The Congressional Black Caucus claims to be the conscience of Congress, right? And
Yes.
so I'm going to read you a paragraph from her article, and I want you to discuss, respond to it, right? So she wrote, the CBC has never acknowledged or condemned Israel's occupation, its ever expanding illegal settlements, its violations of international human rights laws, its forcible displacement of Palestinians, or its endless theft of Palestinian land. It has never introduced legislation to eradicate Israel's apartheid system or to demand a ceasefire of the current massacre, even though Israel has killed more Palestinians in the past 4 months than South Africa murdered during its 40-year reign of oppression. End quote. Now, obviously, the evidence supports Getty Israel's assessment. So, my questions are this: why do you think this is the case in terms of the Congressional Black Caucus not taking positions, well, obviously they're not revolutionary, they're neocon, but not taking positions against the genocide in Palestine that Israel is committing? What should, and this is the real question, what should we and what can we do to make the CBC reflect and represent our sentiments and perspectives?
I'm going to answer this question as a colonial subject. I'm a foreigner in this country. The same way that I do not want American enterprises or American soldiers making decisions about what happens in my country, I have to respect that I'm in somebody else's country, and I have no business intervening in their affairs. But let's have an abstract intellectual exercise about what the CBC is and what it does. Uh, and then
Right.
we'll get into its relationship with the current situation in Palestine, which, as Ghassan Kanafani said, is not a conflict and it's not a war. This is something else. The CBC, I think, started uh, the process of starting it, included a West Indian woman named Shirley Chisholm.
Yes.
To the best
She
of
was the
my
only
to
black
the best of my
woman in Congress at that time. Yes. 1969.
and there's a book that was written recently that I wanted to mention to you and to the people who are watching and listening to us, by Michael Fishback, the title of which is Black Power and Palestine: Transnational Countries of Color, published in 2019 by Stanford University Press. And in that book, there's a series of chapters which talk about Shirley Chisholm and talk about Bayard Rustin and talk about A. Philip Randolph and talk about Roy Wilkins and the people in CORE and the people in the Urban League like Vernon Jordan, about which we
Mhm.
will not say very much because out of respect that there might be some children listening to us as well. Uh, and the context in which the CBC develops, I think, is important to approach it from the counterinsurgency work that was going on in Algeria during the 1950s. There's a French soldier named David Galula, whose work was purchased by the Rand Corporation and was used not only in the United States but used everywhere in Africa and in Latin America, where the American corporations have investments, in order to distract free thinkers and labor unions and social movements and counterinsurgencies from armed insurrection and from breaking the back of the foreign investors by encouraging them to participate in electoral processes. And if you remember the work of Bayard Rustin after the March on Washington in 1963, Bayard lost his job and he was rewarded richly through the finances that he was given access to in order to encourage that national mobilization to divert its interest into the electoral process.
Right,
And
right.
then you
He
get
wrote
rich.
that famous article, which was From Protests to Politics,
Yeah,
that sought to move the movement from protests, demonstrations, struggle to the electoral arena. Precisely, yes,
And
absolutely.
and this discussion has an echo again, even in the Black Panther Party, from the folks in Oakland who wanted to participate in elections, and the people in New York and elsewhere who wanted to transform the process of making decisions in the economy, in education, in transportation, in finance, etc., by whatever means were available to them. And Bobby Seale, who was a former member of RAM, wanted to participate in the electoral processes together with Miss Brown.
Okay,
Whereas
now let me slow you roll. You distinctly linked Seal to Ram. Were you doing that to make some broader political point, or are you just making a statement of historical fact?
I'm just saying that as far as I have read, and you may correct me because you understand this better than I. Bobby Seale at one point in his life was a member of RAM, and
Okay,
years after that, when he was in the leadership of the Black Panther Party, he participated in the electoral process in Oakland together with Miss Brown.
okay.
That's all
So
I'm.
it's meant to be a historical point and not a political analysis about the politics of Ram.
I'm not going there.
Okay. All right, my brother. Could pick that up. I just want to make sure because um, while RAM needs to be studied more, there is a general sense that RAM pushed a revolutionary nationalist ideology and practice. And I wanted to make sure that you weren't saying that there was a current of a neo-colonial politics there. Okay,
I am
cool.
not. I am not. I wouldn't do that out of respect for Malcolm X and all of his disciples,
Okay, good.
especially after Malcolm's two speeches in Detroit, which are sort of the cornerstone of Black studies, as far as I'm concerned.
So let me get you. So the CBC is created, and you're suggesting that it was created for neo-colonial purposes.
I'm I'm
And yeah, go.
I'm suggesting that after the 1963 March on Washington, the ruling elites in the United States thought that it was necessary to distract the organizations and the people who were the promoters of that demonstration. By the way, there was a delegation of Puerto Rican lawyers that included my father who attended that march in Washington
Mm.
because they thought it was important to support the civil rights of Black Americans, people who were Black like we are in Puerto Rico.
Certainly, there was a serious debate within the movement in terms of that shift to electoral politics. And on the one hand, I want to kind of push back, right? Because I do think that the Eldridge Cleaver position was adventurous, right? And certainly his analysis around the lumpen proletariat as the agents of historical change um, simply was wrong, right? But the idea of waging guerrilla warfare in terms of the alignment of forces in 1968 um, was not a successful strategy. And so the people who sought to leverage the opening up of the South in terms of that large black population and their capacity to take over cities, towns, and counties in the South, that seemed to be, what would you say, following Nkrumah's argument that seek ye first the political kingdom. Now we understand that there are problems there, but controlling the the formation in which the political decisions are made that have serious economic and cultural impact on our communities made a certain kind of sense, right? What we know happened is that it became a shift from internal colonialism or domestic colonialism to domestic neo-colonialism, in which those black people who were elected became neo-colonial administrators and managers of the black colonies throughout the U.S. So the question is, was that inevitable? Which is what I thought you were trying to suggest, that that was absolutely inevitable. Is that the position you're taking, my brother?
I do not think it was inevitable that the organization and the education and the consciousness raising that took place during the early 60s that ended up, among other places, in the March on Washington. I don't think it's inevitable that all that effort had to go into electoral politics. But that's what the people that were chosen by the ruling elites financed and funded and promoted, was diverting the energy
Mhm.
of the SCLC and the Urban League and the NAACP into electoral politics. The NAACP was bought and paid for from the 1930s on. They
Yeah.
were involved in campaigns against lynching and in labor issues in the 1930s, and all of a sudden they get some funding in the 1930s and they move to the courts, and
Yeah. Yeah.
this is repeated in the 1960s with the help of these organizations whose major donors were members of the ruling class. And
So to sum it up, and I agree with you, the CBC on the one hand was a product of the shift to neo-colonial control of the black community. The CBC has never been black funded and financed, right? And
yeah,
so you're saying that it would that the fact that they would end up serving white American capital in terms of protection of, Israel plays the role of a sub imperial state for the US. Um, that this is clearly the direction of the CBC went, was this is what you're saying it was created to do. And so one should not be surprised that this is the role that it plays. My question is this.
what do we do instead?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Thank you, brother.
there's
What
there's
is to be done?
there is a book by one of Fanon's high school teachers in Martinique, named Aimé Césaire, and he wrote a book called Discourse on Colonialism,
Mhm,
which
mhm.
suggests two things. First, that to look at race without class is not a, a powerful enough explanation in order to understand the world around us. And the other thing is that the reason why Europeans and North Americans were upset with the Nazis is because the Nazis did in Europe the same thing that Europeans and North Americans have done in Africa, in Asia, and in Latin America, and especially
Throughout the Americas.
Caribbean, especially in the Caribbean, where they first rehearsed in Ireland, who are the niggers of the
Yeah, 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 that's right.
there. But after their rehearsals in Ireland, the first place where they implemented all of that barbarity and genocide and enslavement and racialized exploitation was in the Caribbean. Well,
And
and Césaire knows that full well, as do the rest of us. And now in the 20th century, the black communities are places of geographic concentration of impoverishment, like the barrios and like the Indian reservations and like the Chinatowns across the country. Those are the domestic colonies of the United States.
yeah.
And in every counterinsurgency,
Well,
uh,
I would argue that they were domestic colonies, but certainly for African Americans, it's a domestic neo colony, right? Meaning that the rule in Black America is people of African descent as mayors, city council, school board members, and the black petty bourgeoisie plays a role in managing the rest of the state apparatus in terms of welfare agencies, in terms of police. Um, that this is a neo colony now because these Negroes run the lower echelons of that system. And I would suggest this to you, Brother Santiago, that the battle between the Republicans and the Democrats is that the Democrats want to continue the neo colony, the neo colonies. The Republicans want to return to direct white rule over black folks. They want to eliminate black people in public office and they want to directly rule. They want to go back to a more revanchist form of rule. All right. So that's my editorial.
Now, if you exclude people who are these junior partners or these
Mm-hmm.
accomplices of racialized exploitation, then the people in the neighborhoods where exploitation is geographic and impoverishment are
Mm-hmm.
geographically concentrated are going to be able to identify the people who profit from their exclusion. They're going to be able to identify the causes of their problems, and it's in that sense that this intermediary sector is necessary. And when they get really good at it, they're promoted to be part of the CBC.
And
When
they're
they
really
try,
good at it. They can become president,
when
huh?
yeah, like Obama,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
when they get
Absolutely.
really good at being junior partners and they get to be sergeants in the police department and they get to be judges, they get really good at that. Then they have earned their promotion to be members of Congress and to be the black face of American fascism.
No, absolutely. I want to shift us a bit right here, and I want to talk about Russia and Ukraine, and
Let's
from
go
a
there.
Black internationalist, Pan Africanist perspective, right? What's our interest in the outcome of this war?
The heading for this section of our conversation is my enemy's enemy is my friend.
Mm, okay.
Uh, the war between the Russian Federation and NATO on Ukrainian territory. This is not a war between the Russian Federation and Ukraine. This is a war between the Russian Federation and NATO on Ukrainian territory, or what's going to be left of Ukrainian territory when Russia wins. I think is important for Afro-descendant nation states and nationalities, and those of us who are provisionally located inside this decadent and dysfunctional empire for several reasons. First of all, Russia is part of the BRICS, which is uh, an alliance of 5 or 6 countries: South Africa, Brazil, India, China, and Russia. And in 2023, more countries joined the BRICS: Egypt, Ethiopia, Iran, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates. And in 2024, over 15 countries have also applied to be part of the BRICS: Algeria, Bolivia, Belarus, Cuba, Bahrain, Kuwait, Kazakhstan, Pakistan,
Mhm.
Senegal, Palestine, Thailand, Venezuela, Vietnam, and Nigeria. And what are these countries trying to do? First of all, they're trying to end the unipolar monopoly of the United States and the European Union over what they call the rules-based system. That is, they make the rules
International system.
and the
Yeah.
rest of
Yeah.
us have to obey the rules that the Europeans, the Japanese, and the North Americans make. Well, these countries are getting together to break that. And that's one reason why there's this war uh, on Ukrainian soil between Russia and NATO, because NATO is the mercenary arm of the European and North American and Japanese corporations. There's a second reason, because this BRICS is trying to de-dollarize international trade. They're trying to abolish the Bretton Woods regime, which forces
Mhm.
every country that wants
Okay,
to.
I got to roll you back. Um, See, you're a political economist. I do
Yes,
political economy. Our audience may not, so you got to tell folks what the Bretton Woods Agreement. What is that?
it,
And the
even
Bretton Woods system that emerges.
even before World War II ended, even before 1945, the United States called its lapdogs and junior partners to North America to arrange an economic system that was going to operate after the war ended. And that economic system was going to be based on whenever you traded in the world, you had to change your currency to dollars. And at that time, the dollar was supported by the gold reserves that were held in Fort Knox. Now, if we go forward from 1945 to 1975, the United States lost the Vietnam War. And after the defeat of the United States in Vietnam, the before that 1975 defeat, I was in Ghana when this happened. President Nixon separated the U.S. dollar from the gold reserve.
From the gold standard.
Yeah,
Yes, absolutely.
at this point, to get now in 2024, there's nothing that backs up the US dollar except good wishes and the rules-based regime that was established in the 1940s that
And
forces.
the U.S. military, my brother, the U.S.
Oh
military.
yes, and
Don't, don't, don't forget that.
that's why
Yeah.
this war is so important. uh
So I want to push back on you some though,
Go ahead.
in this sense. A mentor of yours, Samir Amin,
Yes,
when confronted with the war between the Axis powers and the so-called allies, right? In other words, fighting the Nazis, uh, Japan, Germany, Italy. Samir Amin said that my enemy of my enemy does not apply in this situation. I'm wondering if, Russia is a white supremacist state.
agreed.
Um, they are helping to organize and finance white supremacists worldwide. Uh, is this a situation where Samir Amin's argument that the enemy of my enemy does not apply is
Maybe
the
true.
best position for people of African descent because much of the Trump is Putin's puppet in the US, and the MAGA movement is what Russia would unleash throughout the world. So these are racists.
In order to address these concerns, it may be useful to identify the other elements of the BRICS program or the BRICS project that Russia is a part of. In addition to promoting a multipolar decision making system on a global
Mhm.
scale, in addition to de dollarizing, that is, ending the monopoly of the dollar in international trade, uh, the BRICS are trying to create either an alternative to the United Nations, which is also part of the instruments of the United States foreign policy. This is something that Gaddafi promoted in 2011, and it's one of the reasons why he was assassinated by Mrs. Clinton and Obama. The third element would be the democratization of the United Nations. A fourth
Mhm.
element A fourth element is to strengthen the alternative to the IMF and the World Bank, through which the European Union and especially the United States, which has controlling interest in both of those financial
Right.
institutions, strangle the rest of the world. And they have something called a New Development Bank, which is presided over by the former president of Brazil, Dilma Rousseff. Another element is to challenge the monopolies of Europe and North America in information technology. The BRICS are going to lay a fiber optic cable to communicate all the members of the BRIC outside the spying agencies of the European Union, NATO, the United States, and Canada. And finally, to create a common currency that's going to be backed up by three-quarters of the world's gold reserves, which are in the hands of Russia, China, Iran, and Venezuela,
In South Africa.
and South
They have,
yeah, and South Africa.
yeah, about
Now,
39% of gold reserves in South Africa. So I agree with that program. My only question is Russia and its role. But let us move on because I want to get this. The news has been popping today in terms of Haiti.
yes, they do.
Um,
They often do.
yeah, it often do, but it's been really, really hot today. So, what's your thoughts on the CARICOM proposal for this transitional presidential panel, a so-called unity government, and how do you see um, Jimmy Chavarzé, and what can you say about the G9 uh, and Juan Charles Moise and the platform Pete Dessalines Party, I named after Jean-Jacques Dessalines. Um, Put them in the context of U.S. imperialism and the role of neo-colonial agent states like Kenya in this context. What's
I,
going on?
I my recollection of 20th century history is that the Mambises in Cuba were called hooligans and bandits, and
Hmm.
the Pancho Villa army that invaded the United States and Emiliano Zapata in Mexico were also called bandits. And that the Fidelistas were also called bandits by the Cuban dictatorship and also by the American,
Zapatista.
yes, by the
Hmm.
American press. They were also called bandits. And people like Lumumba and his followers, after he was assassinated by the CIA, his followers who tried to overthrow Mobutu, they were called bandits as well.
Yes.
So and especially as told you earlier, when I was in a senior in high school, that was the year that the United States invaded the Dominican Republic and tried to dismantle the insurrection to bring back an elected president named Juan Bosch. And I would
Hmm.
hear what was going on in the Dominican Republic on my shortwave radio. And the next morning, read the exact opposite in the New York Times, the newspaper that our prep school teachers were trying to force us to accept as the gospel truth. And
Hmm.
so
Hmm.
I have no idea whether the G9 or the other uh, conglomerate, the GPEP, I have no
Hmm.
idea whether they're bandits or not. I have no idea where
And they
they,
might be social bandits,
yes, like
as Roudet spoke of, right?
yes, exactly.
So-called Robin Hoods. In fact, I do believe that Jimmy Chivers has been described as a social bandit. Right?
He's a
So that's not a. I mean, that's a good thing.
yes,
So go ahead.
he's a former policeman. Police in the Caribbean are like thieves with a license.
Yeah.
and impunity in general. But he left the police, and I have no information about why he left the police. Now, uh, these two conglomerates, the GPEP is
Hmm.
another gang confederation, but they answer to the political parties, to the opposition parties, sort of like the gangs who fought it out in a civil war in Jamaica, when Bob Marley was alive. Uh, the question that I have is, how do the weapons get into the Haitian
Yeah.
private airports, and who runs these airports? These airports are usually run by landlords, and
Hmm.
I don't know if these confederations of gangs have an arrangement with the landlords, or if they have taken over the airports themselves. What
Right.
I
Right.
what I
Right.
do know what I do know is that these gangs are now economically self-sufficient,
Right.
not only from the purchase of weapons in the United States, but from the checkpoints they control, and you have to pay a fee to get from one side of the road to the other. They also control hospitals, and they control schools. And people have to pay a fee to get access to a hospital, and people have to pay a fee to get access to a school. What they do with this money, and there's also the ransom, the kidnapping and
Yeah.
ransom
Yeah.
collection business, and I don't know who's involved in that. But what I think is important to understand is that the person that was assassinated a couple of years ago, who's it's confusing because his last name is also Moise, and
Yeah.
the person who was left as prime minister, who'd never been elected to anything.
Henry.
Yes,
Ariel Henry.
yes, it
Yeah.
would be useful to find out, both the people who are watching and listening to us, to investigate what part of Haiti they come from. Why do I say this? Because there's a
Hmm.
free trade zone in the northern region of Haiti that's run by Hillary Clinton's brother.
Mm.
And one of the politicians who's trying to get the position of replacing the current prime unelected prime minister is also from the northern region, where
Hmm.
this free trade zone is located, and where people like the Clintons have a lot of economic weight and economic power. The Clintons have been going to Haiti for since they were newlyweds, and they have a lot of quote friends there. Obama occupied Haiti in 2010,
Right.
and he established a military occupation of the airport, the same airport that Barbecue now liberated.
And by
Uh,
barbecue, you mean Jimmy Chevalier, head
yes,
of the G9 Family and Allies
exactly,
Coalition.
exactly. So I have more questions than answers. I also think that it's important to put into this situation the previous occupation imposed by Bush in 2004, after the 2004 coup, that lasted for 13 years,
Yes, yeah.
left as a result 10,000 dead people, a lot of fatherless children that were sired by these soldiers from Asia, from Brazil, from Argentina, uh, and the cholera epidemic that goes on to this day, producing deformed children left and right in every town in the country. So, to get to the other part of your question about what is CARICOM doing and Kenya doing, there in the English speaking islands of the Caribbean, there's only two chief executive officers that I would put my hand in the fire for. One is the Prime
Mm,
Minister of St. Vincent, and the other is the woman who's the Prime Minister of Barbados. Those are two
mm,
very serious politicians, two very serious people. The Prime Minister of St. Vincent is named Gonsalves. I met him in Jamaica in 1970 when I was there. And the woman from Barbados is named Mia Motley. She has more courage and more backbone than most of the prime ministers in the other 24, 25 other countries in the archipelago that is our region. The main purpose of the CARICOM is not to intervene in the affairs of any country.
Right.
The main purpose of CARICOM is to establish a common market across the region and to establish an international court of justice so people don't have to go on their knees begging to London or to Paris or
Yeah.
to Holland
Or to Washington. Yeah.
or to Washington. The
Yeah.
Ministry of Colonies of the United States, in addition to CARICOM, is the Organization of American States. And they have not done very much with regards to helping the Haitians. I think the answer to what's happening in Haiti, excuse me, is to honor its 225-year history of sovereignty and self government and self reliance. And there are people in Haiti who have said we can solve these problems on our own. We don't need anybody to come and help us. When people in the streets say brother this and brother that, and I don't know them like I know you, I say, look, I've never seen your mother's slippers under my father's bed. You're not my brother. And I think somebody in Haiti should
I
tell
hear you.
the Kenyans that if the Kenyans think that being in the neighborhood is the same as being part of the family, they have another thing coming. And they were
I believe John Claude Moise has said that very clearly.
exactly,
Has said
exactly.
been very clear, and that's one of the things that I am impressed with Chevizet in the sense that he said no foreign troops. The history of foreign troops in Haiti explains the destitute nature of the people in the country today. So yeah, absolutely. So I
And Jean Charles Moise and this Petit Dessalines party, at least if you include some of their friends and some other contacts in the rest of the region, are a good omen.
absolutely.
They have good friends in Cuba. They have good friends in Venezuela, and that is high currency in our region.
No, Moise describes the party as being that his views of the world have been shaped by Jean Jean Jacques Dessalines and by Fidel. So, like you say, that's a good that's a good ideological lineage.
And they have
Absolutely,
a comrade relation with the party of Father Aristide. The
okay then.
Lavalas
That
and this Dessalines party have fraternal relations, which is also a good sign. And it bodes well if the Haitians are allowed to resolve their problems on their own.
that's
The,
right. No, absolutely.
the neo-colonial mentality of always needing some foreigner to come and tell you how to do things is in a country that doesn't know what democracy is, like the United States, in countries like Europe that have no idea about what democracy is. All you have to do is read Black Jacobins by CLR James to understand that the Haitians can give all of us lessons about what democracy is about, the price that we
Absolutely.
pay for it in order to be free. And in order to emancipate yourself, nobody's gonna give that to you. Emancipation
That's right.
is something that we have to take, and we have to take it, and we don't take it by voting.
Gotcha. Now, so we got 20 minutes left. I want to save at least 15 minutes for Q&A. So I want to ask you one question about your interpretation, your sense of what's happening in the motherland. That in the last 4 years, there's been 7 coups on the African continent. I think 2 of the coups occurred in Burkina Faso and Mali, but there were also coups in Niger, Sudan, and Guinea. What's your sense? Like, in my studies, I've seen military coups can be led by leftists or led by rightists, right? So, what is the character of the coups that have occurred since 2020? What do you know about it?
What I can provide this conversation, Sundiata, is some context information. As you know, Yvette and I have been going to Senegal every year since 2002. I teach in the African Studies laboratory at the National University. I also give one lecture in the graduate school in the philosophy department seminar every summer when we're there. And we also, for several years, we also traveled to Mali, so I have some understanding of the situation there, uh, and also in Burkina Faso, having studied the life and work of Thomas Sankara, who was, by the way, overthrown and assassinated by a coalition between mercenaries from Liberia run by the CIA and the French government of Francois Mitterrand. Most of the countries that you mentioned, Burkina Faso, Mali, Guinea-Conakry, and Niger, are former French colonies, and the
Mm-hmm.
French Empire exists in Africa to this day, except in these countries that have had military coups since 2020, when the French military was expelled. But uh, em- the empire the French have set up, it does not depend exclusively on the military delegation or on the military occupation or on the military garrisons that they have in every francophone country in the continent. The French Empire operates much like the American Empire does in Latin America and in the European Union and in Japan. The French Empire in Africa, on the basis of the currency, every country in the French speaking system has to deposit its national treasure in Paris. It's
Mm.
in the national treasure of every French speaking country in Africa is in Paris. And when they want to extract, they have to get the permission of the French Minister of the Treasury.
Damn.
And they have a currency that's called the CFA, which is the currency of the uh, French in Africa, which is like a mirror image of the decisions that are made in Paris. And it's
Mm.
exchanged with the dollar, it's exchanged with the euros, but those decisions are not made in French-speaking Africa. Those decisions are made in Washington and in Paris. So it's through this economic dependency plus the military occupation that the French Empire continues. Plus, if you must, the French equivalent of CNN and the French equivalent of Fox News and the French equivalent of MSNBC gives people in Africa more news about what's happening in Paris and in London and in Rome and in Madrid than it does about what's happening in the next door village.
Yeah.
The they are so, extraordinarily better funded than the national uh, news service, than the national radio service, than the national TV service. And just like for the American Empire, going from Puerto Rico to an American university is something that's considered like going to the moon from Earth.
Wow.
In French Africa, going from a private school in Mali or Senegal or Burkina Faso or Niger or Chad or Conakry, going to school in Paris gives you like a lifetime ticket to the golf club,
Yeah.
the to the first table in every banquet. And so it's in under these conditions that in order to do three things which are very important for epistemological sovereignty, that is for developing our own truth, which is questioning the assumptions, redefining the vocabulary, identifying the causes of our problems, and most important of all, identifying who profits from the
Yes.
conditions from the conditions in which we're forced to live against our wishes. That's not possible if you're taught to think like a Frenchman in West Africa, or you're taught to think like a Yankee in Puerto Rico, or if you're taught to think like a white man in an American ghetto, or in an American Indian reservation, or in an American barrio in the Southwest or in Florida. And being able to create and to imagine a world without foreign intervention, if we're lions, a world without the hunters,
Hmm. Hmm.
uh, is something that requires the kind of conversation that we're having here, the kind of conversation that Freire proposed after reading Fanon. It's the
But
conversations where we are able to identify what are our shared problems, what obstacles exist to solving them, and how we construct a strategy to solve our shared problems. And we test it by going out and executing the direct actions, which Freire and Fanon called praxis, by executing the direct actions that allow us to transform the reality in
Henry,
which we.
can you take him out,
I think
brother? I'm sorry. No,
you're
my
having
dog, my dog is acting up. Wonderful, precise, and what I'm taking away from that summary is that we are now dealing with neocolonialism, whether we're talking about the African American colonies in the U.S. or whether we're talking about what they're attempting to impose on Haiti, or whether we're talking about what those military led rebellions in former French colonies are responding to. So, with that said, let me ask you if you have any concluding comments or any announcements before I go to the chat.
there's one final comment I'd like to make about what's happening in West Africa and the Sahel, in the Sahara region. When Yvette and I first went to Mali, we arrived there at 9 o'clock at night, and the temperature was 110 degrees. After it
Now,
was,
now, when you first went to Mali, what year are we talking about?
we're talking about 2004 or 2005, and we arrived between 8 and 9 o'clock at night. And when we got out of the airplane, the temperature was above 100 degrees Fahrenheit. You want me to repeat that?
Yeah, no, no, no. Look, I had the same experience going to Qatar. At midnight, I walked out the airport and it was over 100 degrees.
Yeah,
At midnight.
yeah.
Yeah.
And at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, you have to close the doors and go to sleep because there's nothing else you can do. Now, under these conditions, the fact that the soldiers in Burkina Faso and in Mali, Traore, led by Traore and Goita, were able to construct an alliance between Burkina Faso and Mali and Niger that told ECOWAS, which is the equivalent of CARICOM in the
Hmm.
Caribbean, that was told ECOWAS, okay, if you want to attack us, come on in. But there's three of us that are going to stand shoulder to shoulder against anything that Nigeria and its minions decide to throw at us. The fact that they were able to come together and create a trilateral alliance between those three countries, I think suggests something new that we need to pay attention to in order
I agree.
to figure out again what are the assumptions that are being challenged, what is the new definitions of vocabulary that we need to pay attention to, and what how do they explain the causes and the consequences of the conditions that they live under. In one of these countries, for example, they've nationalized the mining industry.
Yes, yeah. Okay, then that leads me directly to a question in the chat. Priester John asked this: who is responsible for unleashing private for profit mercenary armies with mining divisions across Africa?
The companies that control the international trade, whether it's diamond or cobalt or nickel or uranium, and there's an addition to the mercenaries in East Congo, for example. There's several armies that are paid for by the Ugandan and the Rwandan government. And
What's the name of that Russian mercenary group? That
Wagner,
Wagner group is all over this.
yeah, that's true
Yeah,
as well.
yeah. Putin. So another question. Yeah, man, you're in the same bed with Trump. Uh,
Hardly, hardly.
Imran Makhani asked you specifically: do you see a political strategy as hopeful to interrupt the Gaza genocide in the context of the internationalist struggle?
One of there's two bibliographical references that I read and reread in order to understand and make sense of what's happening in Palestine. One is the Palestinian who was the ideologue of the Popular Front, named Ghassan Kanafani, and I suggest you read and that your audience reads whatever you find written by him. He was a commander who never fired a shot. He was the
Hmm.
ideologue for the Popular Front, and he ran the magazine, and he was the public spokesperson in Beirut, Lebanon, until he was killed by the Israelis. The
So you
other,
mean he was Fatah?
no, he was in the Popular Front. That's a
Okay,
Marxist organization.
okay, okay. Sorry.
Fatah is the equivalent of
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
in
What
the
do?
United States. Fatah is like Jesse Jackson.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, they became that. Yeah.
But
Um.
the Popular Front is the organization that has been calling for a one state since the 1970s. They've been calling for a one state solution where everybody in between the river Jordan and the Mediterranean Sea has the same rights. Everybody has the same decision making input, and where it's not possible to say that uh, the Zionists have a right to a state on
To an
stolen.
ethno state. Yeah.
No, not on stolen land. The Zionists are no different than the pilgrims who came to the United States and assassinated the indigenous people and then created, quote, a democratic republic on their bones and on the land that they had stolen. There's very little difference between the history of the United States and the history of the Zionist regime. And what Ghassan Kanafani and his colleagues in the Popular Front suggested, again, since the 1970s, is one state where every man, woman, and child has the same rights. And just like in the United States, African Americans and Latinos are going to be the demographic and electoral majority in the next 10 years. In Palestine, Palestinians are going to be the electoral
Yeah.
majority and the demographic majority in the next 10 years.
Well, they already are from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean. They are the
Yeah.
majority.
And in Chile, there is more Palestinians located under the same state than in any other country in the world. And most people in North America and in Europe don't take into account that there are Palestinian communities in Saudi Arabia, in Yemen, in Kuwait,
Right,
in
right, right,
Jordan,
right.
in Syria, in Europe, and in Latin America.
And in the U.S.
Yes, and
Yeah,
it,
that
and
one state solution. I don't know how you see that happening, but I want to move because I got other questions I want you to address. And one is, can you talk about the state or the Puerto Rican struggle today?
I just returned from our occupied country about 2 weeks ago, and it's very difficult to imagine or invent the future of a country that has been that whose productive sector has been strangled, whose agriculture has been eliminated by force of the tariff walls that the United States imposes, and whose industrial sector is controlled by foreign enterprises. And we cannot protect our industry because we're forced to have open economic walls with the United States. We're forced to trade with the largest, excuse me, the most expensive merchant marine in the world, and
Mm,
everything that gets on an American boat has to have an American crew, and it has to be built in the United States. And those crew members have to be paid American wages so that everything that travels from Louisiana or from Florida to Puerto Rico immediately increases the cost of living in Puerto Rico by 25%, even though labor workers in Puerto Rico are paid one third of the salaries that American workers are paid for.
are you talking about Puerto Rico? Or are you talking about the 13 colonies in relationship to Britain?
I'm talking about how,
No,
how
no, you get my point, right? That
yeah, the
that was the same
territories
rule that
produce.
Britain had
Yes,
for the 13 colonies. Yeah,
yes. And
exact same. That's colonialism. Yeah,
colonialism
absolutely.
colonialism is not the white man's burden trying to civilize the uncivilized. Colonialism is a business. And in Puerto Rico, the American foreign companies invest $70 billion a year, and they get 100% profit every year. They extract $140 billion. That is, for every $70 billion that are
Yeah.
invested annually, they double the investment. By the end of the year, they have turned that into $140 billion. And that
Man.
doesn't take into account the $90 billion that are leaving the country every year to go get deposited in tax havens. That is dark
Mm.
money, illegal money. So under those conditions, it's very difficult to imagine or construct at this point a sovereign economy or a sovereign society. Now we take uh, our guidance from the work of Iqbal Ahmad, who was a Pakistani anthropologist who lived in the United States. He's a graduate of Princeton University. He did his field work in Algeria. And since in Pakistan you have to have military training in order to graduate from college, the National Liberation Front in Algeria recruited him to participate in the liberation struggle in Algeria. He did. And he wrote, one of the essays that he wrote is, how do you tell when the insurgents are winning? And he compared the struggle in Vietnam and the struggle in Algeria. I would add to that the struggle in Palestine and the struggle in Cuba
Mm.
and the struggle in Nicaragua. And you can tell when insurgents are winning by their capacity to build parallel institutions
That's
to
right.
every institution that the colonial regime has established. The best example of that is Ireland. The British occupation of Ireland had a mirror state of the Irish
Hmm.
Republican Army, which included hospitals, courts, parliament, publications, etc. And a insurgent regime has the possibility of winning when it has created an alternative school system, an alternative media system, like the one that we're talking on now, an alternative court system, an
Mhm.
alternative parliament, and
Dual
can,
power.
yes,
Yeah.
counter
And
power. That's what
yeah.
popular culture is. It's a counter power. It's not dancing to Michael Jackson
And
or
that's what Hamas has succeeded in doing in the
exactly,
Gaza Strip. Okay,
exactly.
my producer is telling me we're out of time. That
Sorry.
well, actually, he's telling me we're 30 seconds over. No, that's on me, not on you. We have a bargain with our viewership that we say we're going to do 90 minutes, so we're going to try and stick close to that. So, my brother, I'm gonna take you off screen. I'm gonna go off screen, and we're going to play the credits.
The next time we can talk about Samir Amin and the vulture funds.
I'm gonna bring you back to talk about that. Absolutely, I'm a big Samar Amin fan as well. Okay.